Hey everyone, it's Jolt here. Welcome to Visual PKM. This video is going to be a very quick introduction to a neat reading workflow that I'm doing. I'm going to use Bob Doto's A System for Writing as an example, but I'm not going to dive into the book. I rather want to show you my process here that I think is a very neat way of reading books. So let's dive in, let me show you, and let me know in the comments below if you like these type of videos. I have to be honest, I did zero preparation, so this is an in-the-moment video. I just thought that this would be an interesting topic. So this is my visual summary for Bob Doto's book. What I did was, as I was reading the book, for each chapter, I created a visual summary. And each of these summaries are then organized around the book. You can also see that in part 3, where Bob goes into the process of writing, I frankly lost interest. Overall, this is a good book on Zettelkasten, so I can definitely recommend the book, but it was too much writing oriented and not visual enough. So for me, that was a bit of a turn off at the end, but overall the book and the information it gave me about Zettelkasten was absolutely fantastic. I loved it. And what I want to show you is what's my structure behind this book. So first of all, this is my idea integration board for the book. And each of these mind maps are, of course, a separate file with their links and various elements. So you can see here my notes about the introduction, about terminology, a little bit around the overall slipbox method and this filter here. And you can see this process that actually reminded me of this other process that I recorded. So this is from How to Take Smart Notes, or this is my illustration from How to Take Smart Notes. So if I open the book on a page for How to Take Smart Notes, then you can see that I have this illustration here, and by just placing that illustration into my mind map right here on the introduction chapter, I created a link between these two. But actually, this is not the most exciting part. I will go into a bit more detail why I have a separate summary visual about each chapter, because there's a bit more to it than just the visual itself. But in this case, if I flip over the page to the Markdown view, then of course you can see my book page here. And the bit that's special about this book is Bob was so kind to give me the ePUB version of the book. So this was, he approached me and he gifted me this ePUB. So I'm grateful for your gift, Bob. It was a good book. Thank you for sharing the ePUB. And this also makes it possible for me to show you my process here, because what I did was I imported this ePUB into Obsidian. And each of my chapter notes are actually, if I flip this introduction chapter, for example, over, then here, this is the actual book text. And within the book, I have my highlights right here. So this way, my reading experience and my note-taking experience are completely intertwined, because the link to, for example, Sönke's How to Take Smart Notes and to this illustration of how the byproduct of one production line becomes the resource for another, this linkage happens at the chapter level. Or if we take another look here at another chapter, so for example, let's open the summary for chapter 4. If I look at chapter 4, then I'm now going to do something. I'm going to split this to the right. So I have the same page open twice. And this one, I'm going to flip over to the Markdown view. So now I'm looking at the same chapter, and this is how I'm reading the book. I'm looking at the chapter here. I'm making my highlights here. And if I come across an interesting idea, I add it to the right side. But I also add links here. So for example, if I want to navigate to this idea to give context to your connections, I can click here and it is going to take me on the left-hand side in my document to that location. So this way, my notes in the mind map are directly connected to my notes in the book. And this is, of course, the source book notes here. So how do I import the ePUB? Obsidian has lots of awesome plugins. So there's an ePUB importer plugin as well. In this case, I created a separate ePUB import vault for this. So this vault, the only purpose of this vault is to import ePUBs. So the vault is normally completely empty, but what I can do is I can take the ePUB file that in this case I got from Bob. I can place it right here, and let me just open here community plugin so you can see this is the name of the plugin, ePUB importer. I use it mostly out of the box. The only strange thing here, I don't really understand why the developer chose this approach, but I have to provide the name of the folder from where I'm importing the ePUBs in an absolute path. So this is not an Obsidian path, but this is the path on my hard drive. So Obsidian sits on my F drive, and this is then the ePUB import folder. This was to me a bit strange, but once I set this up, the process is pretty simple. I place the ePUB I want to import into this vault. Then I open the Obsidian command palette and I type in import ePUB to vault. And right now I have a single book here, and I always have a single book here because after that I clean this up. I click import and the book was imported. So here you can see the book is nicely imported. Now, this is almost perfect out of the box, but you will need to do a couple of things to make it work. So for example, here you can see that these links actually don't lead anywhere. So unfortunately, you need to clean up the links. You can do this with some clever search and replace, so you don't need to manually do everything, but it does require a bit of post-production editing, as well as if you have images here, then they will have a name, but you might, so you can see here main note 001300, not a very good name. I like to name all of my images, so as I'm reading the book, not here, but once I'll copy this over to my main vault, as I'll be reading it, I'm going to rename each of these items with the rename context menu action here to give these individual notes names. But after some initial organization and cleanup, so typically I delete some of the unnecessary chapters from here that I don't really want in my main vault. Once I'm ready with this folder, then I will just simply open this folder in System Explorer or Finder if you're on a Mac, and I'm just going to drag and drop this into my main vault. And what happens then is I create this file or this folder structure. So let me just jump here. You can see that this is my folder for the book, Zettelkasten, a system for writing. I have the idea integration board for the book here, but then I also have my chapters right in here, and each of the chapters are then the actual imported full text. Now, the way the chapters work, if I close this for a second, The way the chapters work is, as I read each of the chapters, I add the previous and next links, so it is easy to navigate these chapters. I can just simply click on previous and next, and with that I'm navigating the chapters in Obsidian as I'm reading or as I'm processing it later on. And then the whole idea of why I'm doing it like this is I can show you how all of this looks in ExcaliBrain. So if I open ExcaliBrain here, then you will see that this is the ExcaliBrain view of each of the documents. So you can see that I can also navigate the chapters here. I can press the chapter, the previous and next chapters. And this way, by having this overview per chapter, it's not only that I can quickly glance at this overview and be reminded of what the chapter was about. I can, of course, navigate the chapter, but also you can see here that I have a reference here to my literature notes on how to take smart notes, for example, or I can see here that this is actually an example of, you can see this image here that I took from Matt McGann, 9 Things I've Learned from Running My Distributed Setup in a Multiplayer Roam was the name of the article where I found this diagram, and Matt talks about the daily first note approach and the content first note-taking approach. And the whole discussion here that Bob describes reminded me of this. So you can see here that actually what Bob talks about is an example of the daily note first versus content first approach. Also, you can see here that this is an inbox handling workflow. So I have a link here to inbox handling. The way this link looks like this is because this is a ghost note, or this is a placeholder note. I don't yet have a file called index handling, but I already have 3 notes that reference this. So if I come here, then you can see that there are various topics in my vault that are about inbox handling. One of them is what we just saw here. The other one is the Getting Things Done workflow by David Allen. And the third one is the workflow that is in How to Take Smart Notes by Sönke Ahrens. So this is the workflow that Sönke talks about. But now if we come back to our book, then yeah, we can move on. This is the basic idea, that this way, when I look at a chapter, I get this visual summary that helps me understand how the ideas that I read in this chapter connect to ideas in my vault. And here you can see that I'm referencing books like How the Way We Talk Can Change the Way We Work, or The Creative Act. I'm also referencing some of my permanent notes, like my permanent note about reference notes or marginalia. And of course, here at the bottom, I also have some references that help me. These are mostly images, but of course, even an image can be a connection. So you can see that this image, for example, of reading, I've used in so many different places, and I have a separate video on this topic. It's called the Idea Mixer. I'm going to provide a link in the description that talks about how I use these icons that I reuse in multiple places to find connections between unlikely connections or ideas that otherwise I wouldn't recognize are connected. So to summarize all of this, the basic approach that I want to advocate here and that I find super helpful in my own workflow is, especially if you're able to get your hands on the EPUB of the book or somehow the full text book, then importing that book into your vault, chapter by chapter, adding this limited additional metadata that connects chapters to chapters, creates a super interesting reading environment where you're actually reading in Obsidian itself. You don't need to use a tool like Readwise or any of the other tools. You're reading here, you're adding your highlights here, and as you're adding your highlights, you're immediately adding links to other notes in your vault. And this way you're creating a connected, you're integrating the book into your note system. And then on top of all of this, creating these visual summaries. As I was quickly glancing through my summary here of Bob's book, it was an awesome way to remind myself of what the book is about in terms of taking and making notes, in terms of making and leveraging connections. He talks about these trains of thought, and I like this metaphor of trains of thought. What he's referring to by a train of thought is the connection of Zettelkasten notes. Let me see if I have, yeah, so this is what I mean. So these chains of notes about the topic that then you can pick up and use as the basis for your writing. So if I come down here, you can see that's what he's talking about, that when you're looking for a topic to write about, then your Zettelkasten system will talk to you through the way of chains of notes, and then you can pick these notes up and you can do your slicing to cut the frail beginning and end, and to cut unnecessary pieces out of this. So that's what this train is trying to illustrate, and with that you can create your draft of a document. By the way, I'm going to provide another link here, which is the ExcaliBrain writing machine, that sort of builds on this idea that Bob is exploring, but gives it a visual spin, which I think is much more powerful than just doing this all in bullet points and in text. But in whichever way you're more comfortable, the basic idea is this in Zettelkasten. And yeah, this is all I wanted to share with you, that I think this is a super fun way of reading books, and not only fun, but extremely good in terms of internalizing what you're reading. And if all of this was interesting to you, then I recommend you check out the visual thinking workshop. I'm going to have a link in the description as well. In the visual thinking workshop, in the self-paced course, and in the cohort, these are the sort of ideas that I'm exploring, and I'm providing a much more detailed walkthrough of the workflow and of the processes and of the tools of how you can create similar visual summaries of books, podcasts, videos, whatever you're consuming. I hope you like this video. I would really be interested in your feedback. Do you like these in-the-moment videos, or do you rather like videos that are well prepared? And also, I'd be interested in what you think about this workflow. Would it work for you? Would you find your own vault too distracting? Do you prefer to read on paper, or you actually consider reading on your laptop or on an iPad? Anything, any ideas that were triggered by this approach? How would you make this workflow even better? I would be very interested in what you think. So thank you for watching until the end, and hope to see you next time.